Hey guys, we're back for part 2 on the Miata. Let's get underneath here and we'll show you how the approach I'm taking on this. Just got done installing this tubular front bumper support, but it's not what we're here for. We're looking at this front subframe. All right, so you can see I've got a lot of new parts underneath there and a lot of stuff disconnected. There's a few different ways to go about this. I'll just go over the pros and cons and the way I'm doing mine. So notice my outer tie rods and my sway bar aren't connected. But if you choose to go the way I see a lot, it's really a good time to do a lot of servicing. I've already been in here and redone the suspension, the brakes, all the suspension components, the bushings. I've got new 949 racing alignment bolts and everything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the entire subframe with everything on it, except I'm going to disconnect the rack up here. Or we'll see if I can get a good slip angle on that. Otherwise I'll just take these out. These are 14s and I'll just hang it to the motor. But there's 6 or so bolts, or nuts and bolts. These back here, 14s. The nuts right up there, those are 19s. And then you want to disconnect your motor mount nuts, which in my case are 14s. They look like they're aftermarket. If you're going to not do the whole weight, so you want to have these hubs and everything off, you can drop these out as well. Notice my alignment's not even close. These are just in there loosely. So these are 19s as well. And this is typically a 17. This is usually 17 or 19. And if I decide to leave this suspended, I can either hang it off this, drop it out here, and just drop the whole subframe out. So we're just going to kind of look at the two options here. I'm going to pull these out first and see how far I can swing the lower control arm with the hub assembly on it. If it looks like I'll be able to swing it out far enough away to clear this upper part, then I will pull this out, disconnect my sway bar mounts, and then I'll pull the steering rack. If I'm not going to be able to swing that out far enough here, I'm just going to swing it back into place and just put the alignment bolts back in. And we'll drop the whole thing as one unit. I'll disconnect the shocks up in the fender and just drop it as one cradle assembly and swap it all over on the ground. So let's get you set up. All right, we're starting here by disconnecting and pulling out those alignment bolts just to see how much room I've got to swing it out. Now, this top nut here, this 21, you actually have to remove the sway bar bushing, and especially the 949 racing bracket, because that bolt is really long. It actually ends up going into the sway bar mount area. So here I'm just removing all that. I forgot it was a 13. And now we're right here, and you can see exactly where I'm at. And the idea is I pull this out of the way right here, and then I can pull the nut straight out. I did leave a little bit of the threads on there, so that way I don't have to actually disconnect the entire sway bar. I'm just letting it dangle. So we'll just pull the bracket out of the way here, and then we will be able to slide that nut right out. Now I'll have to use a second hand here because trying to hold the phone and do it at the same time isn't going to work. Once this bolt's pulled out, then I'll be able to actually swing the upper and the lower control arms out of the subframe assembly while maintaining attachment to the hub. You can see here you got to remove those nuts, otherwise the big nut's going to hit. So you got to spin those nuts off. If you don't have the 949 racing bracket, you won't have those nuts in the way. But then you'll be able to take the upper and lower control arms, swing it out away from the subframe, and then all you have to do is disconnect these two 14s there. And I also am going to loosen up the connection at the steering column, so that way when I put the new subframe back in, it's going to be actually in alignment here. So let's get this going here and we'll get you back underneath the vehicle. So we'll remove those two nuts, and then we'll actually back down the threads a little bit more so I can get that 21 millimeter long upper control arm bolt out. We'll slide it out into the bracket, and now we can actually see I can wiggle the upper and lower control arms out of the way. Last step on the driver's side is to disconnect the two 14s on the steering column. I'm actually going to hang up this side just with some zip ties underneath the coolant line there, and then I'm going to disconnect. You probably won't see it here because it's quick, but just going to loosen. All right, so we got one half ready to go. You can see in the time lapse I just spun this out of the way. It's hanging by the shock right now, but I'm not too terribly worried about it. And all I did was just spin my control arms out of the way so the bushings aren't going to grab. You can see I'm hanging the rack. Just a couple of zip ties off that thermostat housing there. and everything's out of the way. So we're trying to do this as quick as we can. So all that's left on this side then are the two nuts up here, the one bolt back there, then of course the engine mount. So I'm gonna go over to the other side, do it the exact same way, suspend the rack over there as well, and then I'll get my engine hoist, roll it in, put the engine on the leveler, and we'll drop the subframe. So let's get at it. So this is literally a rinse and repeat of the driver's side. You want to disconnect the alignment bolts, you want to disconnect your sway bar, you want to make sure you can slide that large upper control arm bolt out of the way, then just swing the control arms out of the way. Lastly, when I'm done doing all this, I will just disconnect the steering rack. So that's the other side. Plenty of clearance to drop the subframe on both sides here. And a better view of how everything just spun out of the way. So now I'm going to clean up underneath the car so I can get my engine stand around, and we'll get that in place. We'll hook it up to the factory mounts, get a little bit of weight off the motor mounts, undo the motor mounts first. Make sure I get some separation here at the motor mount. That way I can clear the subframe out. So let's clean up. All right, so we're hooked up. It's got tension. So what I'll do now is I'm going to unbolt the motor mounts from each side and make sure I've got a little bit of separation. We'll drop the subframe. See if you can see, it's just a little bit of separation, just a couple of pumps with the jack. You don't have to go crazy. Again, you just want to keep the motor in the same spot. So now I can undo the bolts underneath and drop the subframe. This is a pretty simple process. I'm just backing down the 19s on each side, not completely removing them because I wanted to catch the subframe, and then take the 14s out from the back, and then I'll just slowly work the subframe down on each side until it's completely loose. And we're just about out here. All right, so you can see I had to fight the motor mounts a little bit. This one's slotted, this side's not. So it's out though. New one's here. I think it's quite ready to slide in, but I'm going to pull it in underneath the cardboard. Now, the key, what was hanging me up, if you couldn't see, is my control arms are just holding this up a little bit. So it's kind of how I removed it. And you can see like this subframe's been modified to get back in there. So this car's been taken apart at least once. It's all out of shape, so hopefully the new one is more square and the frame rails are square and it'll go right in. But not too bad of a job. So let's get the other one ready to go up. I've heard of guys using a jack, but this isn't that heavy. So I just pressed it into place, put a couple of 19 mil nuts on to hold it in place. And now we're just using the jack and slowly walking it up with the 14 millimeter bolts. Once we get it completely flush in the back, we'll tighten up the 19s in the front, make sure the motor mounts are lined up, and we are all set to go for final torque. All right, so there you have it. We're swapped. We're bolted back into place. For the most part, things looking good here. Tight and tidy and proper. Now just reassemble everything. Gonna put the rack back in place, put the suspension back in place. You don't need to see me how to do that. So hopefully that was informative. A little bit of what I was doing on the backside there, as I said in the video, is just work your way up. Get everything hand tight and then torque it down to spec. Saving the motor mounts for last. So you can see here, it's just hanging up. Hopefully you found that informative. Don't forget to click like and subscribe for more Miata updates. Thank you.